Hey guys, tonight we journey back to a world where the flutter of a raven's wings could delay a king's journey, where a loaf of bread placed upside down might invite misfortune into an entire household, where an unexpected howl in the darkness carried more weight than any written warning, and where countless ordinary people lived every single day surrounded by invisible signs they believed shaped their destiny. Imagine a Europe where the boundaries between faith, folklore, ancient pagan traditions, and everyday survival blended so completely that separating one from another became almost impossible. In villages surrounded by endless forests, beneath the towering walls of stone castles, inside crowded market squares, and even within magnificent cathedrals, people searched constantly for clues hidden in nature. Every unusual sound, every strange animal, every unusual dream, and every unexplained illness could be interpreted as a message from forces beyond human understanding. Tonight, we're not exploring dragons or mythical monsters. Instead, we're walking quietly beside ordinary medieval men and women whose beliefs, however unusual they may seem today, influenced how they farmed, married, traveled, raised children, treated sickness, and even faced death itself. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if you enjoy slow historical journeys like this one. Now, dim the lights, settle comfortably beneath a warm blanket, perhaps pour yourself a soothing drink, and together, let us wander gently into the strange and fascinating world of medieval superstition. The Middle Ages stretched across roughly 1,000 years, from the collapse of the Western Roman Empire during the 5th century until the beginning of the Renaissance. During that immense span of time, Europe was never a single united civilization with one shared culture. Kingdoms rose and disappeared, borders shifted almost constantly, languages changed from valley to valley. Yet despite these enormous differences, one feature connected people across much of medieval Europe. Daily life was filled with uncertainty. Modern society depends upon scientific explanations for weather, disease, agriculture, and medicine. Medieval people possessed remarkable practical knowledge gained through generations of observation, but many natural events still appeared mysterious. A healthy child could suddenly develop a fever. A field of wheat might flourish one season and fail the next without an obvious explanation. Lightning could destroy a church tower within moments. A plague might sweep through villages that had seemed perfectly safe only weeks earlier. When answers remained hidden, people searched for patterns. Human beings naturally look for order, especially during uncertain times. Medieval Europeans were no different. If misfortune followed a particular event often enough, even by coincidence, stories emerged explaining why those two events belonged together. Over decades and centuries, those stories hardened into traditions. Eventually, traditions became unquestioned truths passed from grandparents to grandchildren. These beliefs were not simply entertainment. They shaped decisions large and small. Imagine waking before sunrise in a tiny English village during the 12th century. Your home consists of timber walls sealed with clay, a thatched roof, and a single smoky hearth. The rooster announces morning while mist still covers nearby fields. Before stepping outside, your mother quietly crosses herself, whispers a short prayer, and notices that the family cat refuses to leave the doorway. She hesitates. Perhaps today is not the right day to begin the journey. To modern ears, this hesitation sounds irrational. To her, however, caution costs nothing. Ignoring a possible warning might cost everything. That difference in perspective explains much about medieval superstition. Life expectancy remained relatively short compared with today. Harvest failures threatened starvation. Warfare could devastate entire regions. Medical knowledge, though surprisingly sophisticated in some monasteries and universities, could not prevent countless infections. Even wealthy nobles faced dangers that no amount of gold could eliminate. Control over life often felt painfully limited. Superstitions offered something valuable. Not certainty. Hope. If carrying a particular charm increased confidence before traveling dangerous roads, why not carry it? If beginning important work after hearing church bells instead of owl calls seemed wiser, why ignore such advice? If generations insisted that planting crops during certain phases of the moon improved harvests, who would willingly risk disappointing results? Many of these customs blended older pagan traditions with Christian beliefs. Rather than replacing every older practice overnight, Christianity gradually spread across Europe while absorbing, reshaping, or reinterpreting local customs. A sacred spring once associated with an ancient deity might later become connected with a Christian saint. Protective symbols carved into wooden homes sometimes appeared alongside crosses. Villagers rarely saw contradiction. Their world comfortably held both inherited folklore and religious devotion. One of the strongest medieval superstitions involved signs from animals. Animals surrounded daily life more closely than they surround many people today. Horses provided transportation. Dogs guarded homes. Chickens supplied eggs. Ravens circled battlefields. Wolves occasionally threatened livestock. Every creature appeared capable of carrying hidden meaning. Among birds, ravens occupied a particularly mysterious position. Long before medieval Christianity spread throughout northern Europe, ravens had appeared in myths across many cultures. Norse traditions associated them with Odin, whose legendary birds Hugin and Munin symbolized thought and memory. Even after Christian beliefs became dominant, ravens retained an aura of mystery. A lone raven landing upon a rooftop could inspire anxious whispers. If several circled above a village without obvious reason, some believed illness might soon follow. Of course, ravens naturally gathered where food existed. After battles, famines, or animal deaths, they appeared in noticeable numbers. Human observers connected the bird with tragedy, forgetting that the bird merely followed opportunity rather than causing disaster. Owls inspired similar unease. Today, many people admire owls for their beauty and intelligence. Medieval villagers often experienced them differently. Their haunting nighttime calls echoed through forests long after darkness settled over isolated cottages. Since owls hunted while humans slept, their unseen presence felt deeply unsettling. An owl crying near a home might be interpreted as a warning. Perhaps sickness approached. Perhaps someone far away had died. Perhaps difficult news traveled silently through the darkness. Again, coincidence strengthened belief. If an owl happened to call before an unfortunate event, memory preserved the connection. Hundreds of ordinary nights without incident faded away, while the rare matching occasions survived in local storytelling. Black cats carried complicated reputations. Contrary to modern assumptions, not every medieval region viewed black cats negatively. In some places, they brought good fortune, especially aboard ships where sailors valued cats for controlling rats. Elsewhere, particularly during later medieval centuries when fears surrounding witchcraft increased, black cats became linked with suspicious rumors. Historical reality proves more nuanced than popular legend. Many accusations involving witches emerged during the late medieval and early modern periods rather than the earlier Middle Ages. Nevertheless, unusual animals often attracted attention. An elderly woman living alone with several cats might become the subject of gossip if unexplained events occurred nearby. Most accusations reflected fear and misunderstanding rather than evidence. Dreams represented another doorway into the unseen world. Few people dismissed dreams as meaningless. Instead, many believed dreams carried messages requiring careful interpretation. A dream involving flowing water might symbolize change. Dreaming about losing teeth sometimes suggested approaching grief. Seeing unfamiliar strangers could indicate spiritual warnings. Monks occasionally recorded remarkable dreams inside chronicles, while ordinary villagers shared them quietly among family members. Dream interpretation manuals circulated in certain regions, mixing religious symbolism with ancient traditions inherited from Greek and Roman writers. The boundary between sleeping and waking remained surprisingly thin. Likewise, unusual weather inspired endless speculation. Thunderstorms possessed terrifying power before modern lightning protection existed. Lightning regularly struck barns, churches, trees, and homes. People naturally wondered why one building survived while another burned. Some believed ringing church bells could disperse dangerous storms. Bell ringers occasionally risked their own lives climbing towers during violent weather to sound great bronze bells believed capable of driving away destructive forces. Ironically, numerous bell ringers were themselves struck by lightning. Modern historians recognize the tragic danger involved. Bell towers stood among the tallest structures in medieval towns, making them particularly vulnerable during storms. Yet for centuries, the custom continued. Faith, tradition, and hope often outweighed visible risk. The moon also governed countless beliefs. Farmers observed lunar cycles carefully. Certain phases supposedly favored planting beans. Others encouraged pruning fruit trees. Hair cut during one phase might grow thicker. Bread baked beneath another moon supposedly tasted better. Although agricultural observations reflected practical seasonal knowledge accumulated over generations. Many precise lunar claims lacked scientific support. Nevertheless, following inherited customs offered reassurance during uncertain growing seasons. In medieval marketplaces, another curious superstition appeared repeatedly. Accidentally spilling salt. Salt held enormous value before refrigeration. It preserved meat through long winters, flavored otherwise plain meals, and represented considerable expense for poorer households. Spilling it wasted something precious. Over time, waste itself became associated with approaching misfortune. Some families responded by throwing a pinch over one shoulder, believing this gesture confused unseen evil lurking behind them. Exactly how and when this custom developed remains debated among historians, but its remarkable persistence illustrates how easily practical concerns evolved into symbolic rituals. Small daily habits slowly accumulated extraordinary significance. People rarely questioned them because questioning traditions meant questioning parents, neighbors, and respected elders who had followed identical customs throughout their lives. And perhaps nowhere did these inherited beliefs become more deeply woven into ordinary existence than inside the medieval home itself, where every doorway, every fireplace, every cradle, and every evening ritual quietly reflected centuries of invisible fears and comforting hopes. Beliefs that would accompany families from the birth of a child to the final candle lit beside a deathbed, forming a hidden map of protection against a world they could never fully predict. The medieval home was far more than a shelter against rain and winter winds. It was a place where the visible and invisible worlds seemed to meet every single day. Every doorway marked a boundary. Every window opened not only to the outside landscape, but according to many traditions, also to unseen influences. Every fire burning in the hearth represented warmth and life, while every shadow stretching across the room after sunset invited questions that no one could answer with certainty. To understand medieval superstitions, it helps to remember how different a typical evening felt compared with modern life. There were no electric lights filling every corner of a house. Once the sun disappeared beyond the horizon, darkness arrived quickly. Candles and oil lamps provided only small circles of flickering light. Beyond those circles lay deep shadows that shifted whenever the wind slipped beneath a door or the fire cracked inside the fireplace. In those quiet hours, the imagination became an active companion. Children listened to older relatives tell stories while wool was spun or tools were repaired. Grandparents repeated tales they themselves had heard decades earlier. Some stories entertained, others warned against careless behavior. Over generations, the distinction between folklore and practical advice slowly disappeared. One common belief centered upon the threshold of the home. Crossing a doorway was considered more significant than it might appear today. In many parts of medieval Europe, people believed the threshold separated order from uncertainty. Inside the house lived family, warmth, food, and familiar routines. Outside stretched forests, strangers, disease, storms, and countless unknown dangers. Because of this symbolic importance, certain customs developed around entering and leaving a home. A traveler departing for an important journey might pause briefly before stepping outside, quietly saying a prayer or making the sign of the cross. Some families avoided arguing while someone stood in the doorway, believing such disagreements could invite lingering bad fortune into the household. Others discouraged lingering on the threshold altogether, seeing it as an uncomfortable place caught between safety and uncertainty. Although these customs varied greatly from region to region, they reflected a broader medieval habit of assigning meaning to transitions. Birth, marriage, travel, harvest, and death all involved moments when life changed direction. Doorways became physical reminders of those larger transitions. Fireplaces carried their own collection of traditions. The hearth was the heart of the household. Meals were prepared there. Stories were told there. Children slept nearby during the coldest nights. Visitors gathered around its warmth. Since nearly every aspect of domestic life revolved around the fire, it naturally became surrounded by protective customs. Many families believed the household fire should never be allowed to die completely during certain seasons, especially around major religious festivals or during severe winters. A continuously burning fire symbolized prosperity and continuity. Relighting a cold hearth after neglecting it sometimes felt emotionally unsettling, encouraging traditions that emphasized keeping at least a few. Glowing embers alive through the night. Ashes from the fireplace occasionally acquired unexpected importance as well. Some households scattered ashes around gardens, believing they would protect crops. Others spread ashes near entrances to discourage harmful influences. While these actions may appear mysterious today, ashes also had practical uses in agriculture and cleaning. Medieval customs often blended sensible household practices with symbolic meaning until the two became impossible to separate. Bread occupied an equally sacred position within daily life. For medieval families, bread represented survival itself. Harvest failures could mean starvation. Good harvests brought security. Every loaf, therefore, carried significance beyond its nutritional value. Many people carefully marked bread with the sign of the cross before cutting it. This practice expressed gratitude while also asking divine protection over the meal. Some believed failing to treat bread respectfully could invite hardship. Dropping a loaf onto the floor, wasting crumbs unnecessarily, or placing bread upside down sometimes inspired concern. The well-known superstition about upside-down bread survives in certain European traditions even today. Historians suggest several possible explanations. One theory connects the custom with medieval bakers who reserved an inverted loaf for the town executioner, whose arrival often symbolized tragedy. Another explanation simply reflects respect for an essential source of nourishment. Whatever its precise origin, the belief spread remarkably widely. The ordinary loaf became something deserving careful treatment. Salt, too, remained valuable enough to inspire countless customs. Because preserving meat depended heavily upon salt, wasting it carried practical consequences. Medieval households therefore treated it with unusual care. Guests seated together at meals sometimes noticed where the salt container rested. Among wealthier families, seating arrangements around salt dishes could quietly indicate social rank. Those seated above the salt occupied places of greater honor, while others sat farther away. Over centuries, practical dining customs blended with symbolic ideas concerning fortune, hospitality, and respect. Accidentally upsetting the salt container naturally felt alarming. Once again, coincidence strengthened belief. If an unpleasant event followed shortly afterward, the spilled salt received blame. If nothing happened, the incident faded from memory. Human memory has always preferred dramatic stories over ordinary days. The same pattern shaped countless medieval superstitions. Mirrors inspired another fascinating collection of beliefs, although they differed greatly from modern mirrors. Glass mirrors remained expensive luxuries throughout much of the Middle Ages. Many ordinary villagers rarely saw their own reflection except in still ponds, polished metal, or carefully crafted pieces owned by wealthy households. Because reflections appeared mysterious, they attracted symbolic interpretations. Seeing one's distorted image upon rippling water sometimes encouraged speculation about hidden meanings. Although the famous belief that breaking a mirror causes years of bad luck belongs more strongly to later centuries, medieval people already viewed reflections with a mixture of fascination and caution. Water itself occupied a unique place within superstition. Fresh springs frequently gained reputations for healing powers. Some became associated with local saints after Christianity spread across Europe. Pilgrims traveled considerable distances hoping to recover from illness by drinking or washing in these waters. Interestingly, not all such beliefs lacked practical foundations. Certain springs contained mineral-rich water that genuinely offered limited health benefits. Others simply provided unusually clean drinking water compared with contaminated local sources. People observing recoveries naturally concluded the spring possessed miraculous qualities. Faith, observation, and coincidence once again worked together. No clear boundary separated them. Protective objects also filled medieval homes. Some families hung small crosses above doors. Others displayed relics obtained from pilgrimages. Wax blessed during church ceremonies might be carefully preserved throughout the year. Palm branches from religious festivals occasionally remained inside houses long after the celebration ended, believed capable of offering protection during storms or illness. Archaeologists have even discovered mysterious carved symbols hidden inside old buildings across England, France, Germany, and other parts of Europe. These marks, sometimes scratched into fireplaces, door frames, roof beams, or windows, are now called apotropaic marks, a term meaning symbols intended to turn away evil. Many resemble circles, overlapping lines, stars, or simple geometric patterns. For centuries they attracted little attention. Only relatively recently have historians and archaeologists begun studying them systematically. Their exact meanings remain uncertain. Some probably represented Christian symbols. Others may preserve much older protective traditions. What matters is not whether they truly possessed magical power. What matters is that ordinary families believed they offered comfort. Even livestock benefited from similar concerns. A peasant family's greatest wealth often consisted not of coins, but of animals. A healthy cow provided milk. Oxen pulled plows. Sheep produced wool. Losing even one valuable animal could threaten an entire family's survival. Unexplained illness among livestock therefore inspired immediate anxiety. To protect animals, farmers employed both practical and symbolic measures. They cleaned barns. They watched grazing conditions carefully. They also hung blessed branches above stable doors, tied protective charms around animals' necks, or whispered prayers while leading cattle into spring pastures. Church officials sometimes encouraged religious blessings while discouraging older magical customs. Yet in everyday village life, distinctions blurred easily. A farmer might attend Mass faithfully every Sunday while still quietly carrying an inherited charm believed to protect his horse. Few villagers viewed these actions as contradictory. To them, every possible source of protection seemed worth accepting. Perhaps nowhere did superstition become more emotionally powerful than during childbirth. Childbirth remained dangerous throughout the medieval world. Mothers died. Infants died. Entire families understood these painful realities all too well. Consequently, birth became surrounded by protective rituals. Women prayed to particular saints associated with childbirth. Blessed objects might be placed nearby. Relatives remained attentive for unusual signs before or after the baby's arrival. A child born during a violent storm might later acquire a reputation for unusual destiny. An infant entering the world beneath a particularly bright moon could inspire hopeful predictions. Twins occasionally attracted both admiration and suspicion, depending upon local traditions. None of these interpretations reflected scientific reasoning. Instead, they reflected humanity's enduring desire to discover meaning within life's most uncertain moments. Naming ceremonies likewise carried profound importance. Receiving a Christian name connected the child with saints whose lives offered examples of faith and courage. Parents hoped their chosen saint might also provide heavenly protection throughout the child's life. Disease, famine, warfare, and accident remained constant possibilities. Anything offering reassurance gained lasting significance. Even simple household sounds acquired symbolic interpretations. A rooster crowing unexpectedly after sunset. Dogs barking repeatedly toward empty roads. Mice suddenly abandoning grain stores. Each observation encouraged discussion among neighbors. Sometimes these signs accidentally coincided with approaching weather changes or predators, giving the impression that animals sensed invisible dangers before humans recognized them. Modern science confirms that animals occasionally detect environmental changes earlier than people. Medieval observers noticed this long before they understood why. Without scientific explanations, supernatural ones appeared entirely reasonable. As autumn faded into winter and daylight grew shorter, those quiet houses became places where every creaking timber, every gust of wind slipping beneath a wooden door, and every distant sound from the surrounding countryside seemed capable of carrying hidden meaning. And beyond the safety of those homes, stretching across forests, crossroads, lonely hills, and abandoned ruins, lay landscapes that medieval travelers approached with equal parts curiosity and caution, for they believed some places themselves remembered ancient secrets that no sensible person should ignore. Beyond the wooden fences surrounding villages, the medieval landscape transformed into something far less familiar than the countryside many people know today. Roads were often narrow, uneven, and poorly maintained. Dense forests stretched for miles across large parts of Europe. Marshes swallowed pathways after heavy rain. Mountain passes disappeared beneath snow for months at a time. Travelers could walk for hours without seeing another person, accompanied only by the sound of birds, the rustling of leaves, or the steady rhythm of their own footsteps. In such surroundings, the unknown never seemed very far away. Modern maps, signposts, weather forecasts, and reliable transportation have greatly reduced the uncertainty of travel. Medieval people possessed none of these comforts. Even experienced merchants occasionally became lost. Pilgrims heading toward famous shrines crossed unfamiliar territories where different languages, customs, and laws governed everyday life. News traveled slowly, and a traveler rarely knew what lay beyond the next hill. It is hardly surprising that roads themselves accumulated countless superstitions. One belief found in various parts of medieval Europe concerned crossroads. A crossroads was not merely a place where two roads met. Symbolically, it represented a place of decision, uncertainty, and possibility. Ancient Roman roads had crisscrossed much of Europe centuries earlier, while even older pathways linked villages, rivers, and trading settlements. Over generations, intersections acquired reputations that blended practical experience with folklore. Travelers often paused briefly before continuing. Some offered a short prayer. Others simply looked carefully in every direction before choosing their path. The practical reason was obvious enough. Selecting the wrong road could add days to a journey or lead into dangerous territory. Yet practical caution gradually became mixed with symbolic meaning. Crossroads began appearing in stories as places where unusual encounters occurred, where unexpected strangers appeared, or where unseen forces might influence human choices. Many medieval tales describe mysterious travelers encountered at lonely intersections. Sometimes they offered helpful directions. Sometimes they delivered strange warnings. Occasionally they disappeared as suddenly as they had appeared. Whether such stories reflected actual experiences exaggerated through repeated telling or purely imaginative folklore, they reinforced the belief that crossroads deserved respect. Travel at night inspired even greater caution. Without artificial lighting, darkness changed the landscape completely. A familiar road walked confidently during daylight became almost unrecognizable after sunset. Trees cast enormous shadows across narrow tracks. Streams sounded louder than before. Moonlight created moving shapes among branches as clouds drifted overhead. A traveler hearing footsteps behind him might discover nothing more than a fox moving through undergrowth. Yet imagination rarely settled for the simplest explanation. Medieval people understood perfectly well that robbers posed real dangers. Wolves still inhabited many European forests, particularly during the earlier Middle Ages. Sudden storms could transform shallow streams into dangerous crossings. Fear, therefore, had entirely rational foundations. Superstition often grew where genuine danger already existed. A lonely forest path was dangerous enough without invisible spirits. Yet because travelers frequently disappeared, stories naturally arose attempting to explain their fate. Some never returned because they became lost. Others died from illness. Some were robbed. A few undoubtedly fell victim to wild animals. But for families left without answers, uncertainty encouraged speculation. Folklore quietly filled the empty spaces where certainty could not. Certain trees attracted remarkable reputations. The oak held particular importance across much of Europe. Long before Christianity spread throughout northern regions, oak trees had occupied sacred places within Celtic, Germanic, and Slavic traditions. Their enormous size, impressive age, and frequent association with lightning strikes inspired awe. Even after conversion to Christianity, ancient respect for old oaks often survived. Some villages gathered beneath ancient trees to settle disputes. Others held seasonal celebrations nearby. A particularly old oak standing alone upon a hill might become associated with stories reaching back generations. People spoke of unusual lights seen among its branches, strange sounds heard during storms, unexpected encounters experienced beneath its shade. Whether these tales reflected actual observations or simply the human tendency to create stories around remarkable landmarks, they ensured certain trees became woven into local identity. Yew trees carried equally fascinating symbolism. Because yews lived extraordinarily long lives, many churchyards planted them centuries before the medieval period ended. Their dark evergreen branches contrasted sharply with surrounding gravestones, encouraging associations with both death and endurance. Visitors approaching a church through rows of ancient yews naturally experienced a sense of solemnity. Some believed the trees protected sacred ground. Others whispered older stories connecting them with forgotten traditions predating Christianity. Historians continue debating precisely why so many medieval churchyards contained yews. Several practical explanations exist. Their dense roots help stabilize soil. Their long lifespan suited places intended to endure through generations. Yet symbolic meanings undoubtedly developed alongside practical ones. Not every superstition centered upon fear. Some focused upon good fortune instead. Finding particular plants at the right moment could be considered encouraging. Certain flowers blooming unusually early suggested favorable seasons ahead. A healthy abundance of berries sometimes promised mild winters, although modern ecological research shows such natural patterns rarely predict future weather as reliably as folklore suggested. Still, medieval farmers constantly observed nature. Their survival depended upon doing so. Many observations proved remarkably accurate. Bird migrations signaled seasonal changes. Cloud formations often predicted approaching rain. Animal behavior occasionally revealed shifts in weather. Unfortunately, reliable observations gradually blended with assumptions lacking evidence. Separating one from the other became increasingly difficult. Pilgrimages introduced another fascinating dimension to medieval belief. Millions of people traveled to famous shrines throughout Europe. Some sought healing. Others fulfilled religious vows. Many simply wished to express devotion. The roads leading toward places such as Canterbury, Santiago de Compostela, Rome, or countless regional shrines became filled with travelers carrying stories gathered from distant lands. These pilgrims exchanged far more than prayers. They shared rumors, legends, warnings, miraculous accounts, curious customs. A superstition common in northern France might eventually appear hundreds of miles away after repeated conversations between travelers. Ideas traveled almost as effectively as merchandise. Merchants contributed similarly. Unlike peasants who often spent entire lives within a few miles of their birthplace, merchants regularly crossed political borders. They encountered unfamiliar traditions and occasionally carried those customs home. One village might adopt an unfamiliar protective charm simply because respected travelers insisted it had proven successful elsewhere. Human beings have always borrowed comforting beliefs from another. Weather signs remained especially popular. A red sunrise, an unusually bright halo surrounding the moon, heavy morning mist lingering longer than expected. Each observation encouraged predictions. Some possessed genuine meteorological foundations. Others relied entirely upon coincidence. Nevertheless, weather forecasting mattered enormously. Harvest depended upon timing. Travel depended upon conditions. Military campaigns depended upon seasons. Any apparent clue deserved careful attention. Church bells themselves inspired mixed interpretations. Most obviously, they marked time. They announced worship. They warned of fires. They celebrated festivals. Yet many communities believed their sound reached beyond human ears. Blessed bells supposedly frightened harmful spirits, protected crops from hailstorms, and defended villages against unseen dangers. Records survive describing priests blessing church bells with ceremonies resembling baptisms. To medieval observers, bells became more than musical instruments. They were guardians suspended high above the village. When their sound echoed across fields at dawn or sunset, people heard reassurance as much as information. Ruins fascinated medieval travelers no less than they fascinate modern tourists. The remains of Roman villas, abandoned fortresses, broken temples, and forgotten roads surrounded many communities. Few villagers understood exactly who had built them centuries earlier. Legends naturally emerged. Some claimed giants had raised the enormous stones. Others attributed mysterious ruins to legendary kings. Hidden treasure frequently entered these stories. An abandoned tower might supposedly conceal ancient gold. A ruined monastery perhaps sheltered forgotten manuscripts or sacred relics. Occasionally, adventurous individuals searched such places. More often, stories alone satisfied local curiosity. Reality usually proved less dramatic. Archaeological evidence suggests many ruins simply became convenient sources of building stone. Villagers dismantled abandoned Roman structures piece by piece to construct churches, homes, and bridges. Yet even practical recycling failed to erase the aura surrounding ancient places. People sensed history lingering there, although they rarely possessed accurate knowledge of that history. One particularly widespread concern involved whistling. Various regions discouraged whistling under certain circumstances, especially indoors or after dark. Explanations differed widely. Some claimed it invited misfortune. Others insisted it attracted unwanted attention from unseen beings. Modern historians suspect several practical origins. Whistling indoors might disturb sleeping infants. It could also interfere with spoken communication in crowded households. Like many customs, practical habits gradually accumulated supernatural explanations that proved easier to remember and teach. Children learned quickly through memorable warnings. Many medieval superstitions functioned exactly that way. Rather than presenting lengthy rational arguments, adults offered vivid stories. Do not wander into the forest after sunset. Do not ignore strange weather. Do not mock sacred places. Do not travel carelessly. Whether the invisible consequences truly existed mattered less than the practical lessons those stories encouraged. As winter evenings grew longer and travelers hurried toward the welcoming lights of distant villages, another force quietly shaped medieval imagination perhaps more deeply than forests, roads, or ancient ruins. It arrived without warning, entered rich castles and humble cottages alike, ignored political borders, and left behind grief that no superstition could fully explain. Disease, especially during times of epidemic, would transform ordinary beliefs into desperate acts of hope, revealing how fear and faith became inseparable companions whenever invisible illness swept across medieval Europe. Disease haunted the medieval imagination in ways that are difficult to fully appreciate today. A modern person who develops a fever can usually visit a doctor, receive a diagnosis, and often recover with the help of medicines whose effectiveness has been tested over many decades. Medieval Europeans lived in an entirely different world. Although physicians, surgeons, apothecaries, monks, and experienced herbal healers possessed far more practical knowledge than popular myths often suggest, many illnesses still appeared suddenly, spread unpredictably, and vanished just as mysteriously. For ordinary people, disease often seemed almost alive. A village could enjoy months of good health before an unfamiliar sickness quietly appeared. At first, only one family might become ill, then another household. Within days, the church bells rang more frequently than usual. Fields stood untended because farmers lacked the strength to work them. Marketplaces grew quieter. Travelers avoided entering affected settlements whenever possible. No microscope existed to reveal invisible bacteria. No understanding of viruses had yet emerged. Without those explanations, people searched for causes they could observe. Some blamed foul-smelling air drifting from marshes or stagnant water. This idea, known today as the miasma theory, survived for centuries because unpleasant odors often accompanied unhealthy conditions. Others believed unusual alignments of the planets influenced human health. Astrologers carefully studied the heavens, convinced that movements among the stars affected events upon the Earth. Religion naturally shaped these interpretations as well. Many Christians viewed epidemics as reminders of humanity's dependence upon God. Illness encouraged prayer, repentance, charitable acts, and public processions asking for divine mercy. These responses reflected sincere faith rather than simple superstition, and throughout the Middle Ages they formed an essential part of community life. Alongside these religious practices, however, countless local customs continued to flourish. Some villages believed certain herbs gathered on specific feast days possessed greater healing powers. Others insisted that water collected before sunrise on particular mornings carried unusual benefits. In some regions, people quietly tied small bundles of herbs above doors, hoping they would discourage sickness from entering the house. Today, historians distinguish between medicine, religion, and folklore. Medieval families rarely separated them so neatly. A mother caring for her feverish child might pray to a favorite saint, prepare a herbal drink learned from her grandmother, ask the village priest for a blessing, and hang a protective charm nearby, all within the same afternoon. To her, each action represented another expression of hope. One of the most respected healing plants throughout medieval Europe was rosemary. People appreciated its pleasant fragrance, but they also believed it purified the air. During periods of illness, branches sometimes hung inside homes or were carried through streets during religious ceremonies. Modern science confirms that rosemary contains aromatic compounds with mild antimicrobial properties, although it certainly could not stop devastating epidemics. Yet its fresh scent offered comfort. Comfort itself held real value. Lavender enjoyed a similar reputation. So did sage. Garlic appeared in many household remedies. Honey served as both food and medicine. Modern researchers recognize genuine antibacterial properties in certain types of honey, explaining why it occasionally helped wounds heal more effectively than untreated injuries. The practical and the symbolic constantly overlapped. Perhaps no object inspired greater confidence than relics associated with saints. Across medieval Europe, churches and monasteries carefully preserved bones, clothing, or other items believed connected to holy individuals. Pilgrims traveled extraordinary distances seeking healing through prayer near these relics. Not every claimed miracle can be verified historically. Nevertheless, contemporary records reveal countless people sincerely believed they experienced recovery after such pilgrimages. Some recoveries may indeed have occurred naturally. Certain illnesses improve without treatment. Others fluctuate unpredictably. Faith itself can influence emotional well-being, encouraging strength during difficult times. Medieval observers naturally interpreted these recoveries through the spiritual understanding of their age. When illness struck livestock, similar customs appeared. A healthy herd represented survival. Disease among cattle or sheep threatened entire communities. Farmers sometimes led animals around churches during blessing ceremonies. Priests blessed fields and barns. Protective prayers accompanied spring grazing. Again, religion and everyday agriculture blended seamlessly. Then came the greatest catastrophe medieval Europe would ever face: the Black Death. Between 1347 and 1353, plague spread across Europe with astonishing speed. Modern historians estimate that between 1/3 and 1/2 of Europe's population may have died during those terrible years, though exact numbers remain impossible to calculate with complete certainty. Entire villages disappeared. Monasteries lost most of their monks. Cities buried thousands. Families vanished within weeks. The scale overwhelmed every existing explanation. For people living through those years, ordinary superstitions no longer seemed sufficient. Fear intensified everything. Rumors traveled faster than reliable information. One town heard that strangers had poisoned wells. Another believed unusual comets had announced the disaster. Elsewhere, people whispered that particular groups carried secret curses responsible for the epidemic. These tragic rumors sometimes resulted in terrible acts of persecution again. Sent innocent communities, particularly Jewish populations, who were falsely accused in many regions despite suffering from the plague themselves. Modern historical evidence overwhelmingly rejects these accusations. The disease spread through biological processes unknown at the time, not through deliberate human conspiracies. The suffering, however, was very real. During those desperate years, protective rituals multiplied. People carried crosses through streets. Some organized public processions of prayer. Others remained isolated inside their homes. Physicians experimented with treatments based upon the best knowledge available. Herbal remedies, bloodletting, dietary advice, fresh air. Different communities tried different approaches. Many failed. A few accidentally reduced exposure simply by limiting contact with infected individuals. Although medieval people did not understand bacteria carried by fleas living on rats, some practical responses occasionally proved beneficial for reasons they could not explain. The plague permanently changed Europe's relationship with superstition. When familiar customs failed to prevent catastrophe, some people questioned long-held assumptions. Others embraced them even more strongly. Both reactions existed simultaneously. It is important to remember that medieval society did not respond as one unified culture. Different kingdoms adopted different measures. Different clergy preached different messages. Different physicians proposed competing theories. The Middle Ages were never as intellectually uniform as they are sometimes portrayed. Universities had already begun debating medicine using ancient Greek and Roman texts alongside newer observations. Scholars translated Arabic medical works into Latin, preserving and expanding knowledge that otherwise might have disappeared. While ordinary villagers relied heavily upon local traditions, educated physicians increasingly sought systematic explanations. Even so, uncertainty remained enormous. Simple illnesses inspired countless household beliefs. A persistent cough, a nosebleed, an unexplained rash, a child who cried continuously during the night. Every family possessed advice inherited across generations. Some remedies reflected careful observation. Others depended almost entirely upon symbolism. Consider the humble onion. Throughout medieval Europe, onions appeared not only in cooking but also in home remedies. Sliced onions might be placed near sleeping patients because some believed they absorbed illness from the surrounding air. Modern science shows onions do not draw disease out of a room. Yet because they often spoiled or changed appearance over time, observers interpreted those changes as evidence they had captured harmful influences. The explanation seemed perfectly logical within the knowledge available. Another common belief involved the first water drawn from a well each morning. In several regions, people considered it especially pure or beneficial. Whether this reflected symbolic ideas about freshness or practical recognition that cool groundwater remained cleaner before daily use, historians cannot always determine. Sometimes practical experience quietly stood behind traditions that later acquired supernatural explanations. The changing seasons also influenced health beliefs. Spring represented renewal. Autumn encouraged preparation. Winter demanded endurance. Certain days upon the religious calendar became associated with gathering medicinal plants, not because the plants themselves changed dramatically overnight, but because memorable feast days helped communities remember seasonal rhythms. Calendars before widespread literacy depended heavily upon recurring celebrations. A saint's feast became an easy reminder. Gather herbs now. Prepare stores. Expect colder weather. What began as practical timing gradually merged with sacred tradition. As disease continued to challenge every level of medieval society, people searched not only for cures but also for warnings that illness might be approaching. They listened more carefully to birds, watched the behavior of dogs and livestock, noticed unusual colors in the evening sky, and paid close attention to dreams that seemed unusually vivid. In their minds, the natural world was constantly speaking, offering subtle hints about dangers yet to come. Learning how to read those signs became almost as important as treating sickness itself. And nowhere did that search for hidden messages become more elaborate than in the countless omens that medieval people believed surrounded them every single day. Long before weather satellites, laboratory testing, or printed newspapers carried daily information across entire countries, medieval people depended upon observation more than perhaps any generation before or since. They watched the sky before leaving home. They noticed the direction of the wind while walking to the fields. They listened to birds at dawn, paid attention to the behavior of livestock, and quietly remembered unusual events that seemed to precede either good fortune or disaster. Observation itself was not the problem. In fact, careful observation allowed medieval communities to survive. The difficulty arose when accurate observations blended with assumptions that could never truly be tested. A shepherd might notice that sheep became restless shortly before a thunderstorm because they sensed changes in air pressure. Without understanding atmospheric science, he naturally concluded that animals possessed mysterious knowledge unavailable to humans. Over generations, similar experiences expanded into a much larger belief that animals constantly perceived invisible dangers hidden from ordinary people. Dogs occupied a particularly important place within these beliefs. Faithful companions, hunters, guardians, and protectors, dogs shared nearly every aspect of medieval life. Their remarkable senses often appeared almost supernatural. A dog could detect unfamiliar footsteps long before its owner heard anything. It might bark toward darkness where human eyes saw nothing at all. It could find its way home across remarkable distances. To medieval observers, such abilities required explanation. When a dog howled repeatedly during the night, many people grew uneasy. Across different regions of Europe, interpretations varied considerably. Some believed the animal sensed approaching death within the community. Others thought it responded to unseen spiritual beings passing nearby. In a few traditions, persistent howling simply warned of severe weather approaching before dawn. Modern science offers more ordinary explanations. Dogs hear frequencies beyond human hearing. They detect distant sounds carried by changing winds. They respond to scents impossible for people to notice. Yet without that knowledge, the mysterious seemed entirely reasonable. Cats inspired an even wid, or a range of interpretations. Contrary to modern popular culture, medieval attitudes toward cats were surprisingly inconsistent. In many monasteries, cats were valued for protecting precious manuscripts from destructive mice. Farmers appreciated their skill in controlling rodents that threatened grain supplies. Sailors welcomed cats aboard ships for exactly the same reason. Yet their independent nature fascinated people. Unlike dogs, cats often disappeared for hours before returning silently. Their eyes reflected candlelight. They moved effortlessly through darkness. They seemed comfortable in places where humans felt uneasy. These ordinary characteristics gradually encouraged extraordinary stories. An elderly cat surviving many years within a village naturally became familiar to several generations. Its continued presence made it seem unusually wise. Children invented stories. Adults occasionally repeated them. Before long, a perfectly ordinary animal acquired an air of mystery. Birds perhaps occupied the greatest place in medieval omen traditions. They filled the skies every day. Unlike mammals, birds appeared to move effortlessly between earth and heaven. Many cultures throughout history, therefore, imagined birds carrying messages from higher powers. Crows and ravens remained especially significant. Their intelligence impressed medieval observers even if they lacked modern scientific understanding of animal cognition. These birds remembered faces. They gathered around battlefields. They arrived quickly where food became available. Because wars, executions, and famines often attracted ravens, people naturally associated the birds with sorrow rather than recognizing that they merely responded to opportunities created by human tragedy. Swallows inspired far happier interpretations. Their return each spring symbolized renewal. After months of cold weather, the first swallow seen above village roofs announced that winter was finally losing its grip upon the countryside. Many communities welcomed their arrival almost as warmly as the lengthening daylight itself. Destroying a swallow's nest was discouraged in numerous regions. Partly this reflected practical wisdom. Swallows consumed enormous numbers of insects. Allowing them to nest near homes benefited everyone. Practical experience gradually transformed into moral obligation. Good fortune came to households that respected the birds. Misfortune supposedly followed those who harmed them. Again, useful behavior became reinforced through memorable storytelling. Roosters also possessed symbolic importance beyond their obvious role in announcing dawn. Their crowing marked the victory of daylight over darkness. Church towers frequently displayed weather vanes shaped like roosters, partly recalling the biblical story of Saint Peter denying Christ before the rooster crowed. Within village folklore, however, roosters also became unofficial guardians. An unusually early crow might encourage speculation. A rooster calling after sunset seemed particularly strange. Since roosters normally followed predictable patterns, unexpected behavior immediately attracted attention. The event itself mattered less than its rarity. Human memory naturally preserves unusual occurrences. Ordinary mornings disappear. Extraordinary mornings become stories. The sky offered perhaps the largest canvas for medieval imagination. Sunrises, sunsets, clouds, stars, halos around the moon, comets, eclipses. Few natural spectacles inspired greater wonder than a comet. Today, astronomers understand comets as icy bodies traveling through the solar system, their glowing tails created by sunlight interacting with gases and dust. Medieval observers possessed no such explanation. Instead, comets frequently appeared in chronicles immediately before descriptions of wars, royal deaths, famines, or political upheaval. Importantly, medieval writers usually recorded these events after they had occurred. Knowing that a king later died naturally encouraged chroniclers to interpret the earlier appearance of a comet as a warning. This tendency illustrates a deeply human habit. People remember predictions that appear successful. Failed predictions quietly disappear. History often preserves dramatic coincidences while forgetting countless ordinary ones. Solar eclipses produced similar reactions. Imagine standing in an open field during the 12th century. The sun shines brightly overhead. Without warning, daylight begins to fade. Birds fall strangely silent. Livestock become restless. Shadows sharpen. The temperature drops noticeably. Within minutes, the familiar world seems transformed. Even knowing exactly why eclipses occur, modern observers often find them emotionally powerful. Without astronomy to explain them, medieval communities naturally interpreted eclipses as extraordinary signs. Some feared divine judgment. Others anticipated politica. Change. Kings occasionally consulted advisors regarding their significance. Yet eclipses followed precise astronomical patterns entirely independent of human affairs. Nature needed no knowledge of earthly kingdoms. The moon itself inspired endless customs. Full moons illuminated roads enough for limited nighttime travel. New moons marked fresh beginnings in various traditions. Farmers observed lunar cycles carefully, hoping they might reveal the best moments for sowing seeds, harvesting crops, or pruning orchards. Modern agricultural science acknowledges that seasonal timing profoundly affects farming. However, the specific influence attributed to lunar phases often exceeded what evidence supports. Even so, following established customs gave farming communities confidence during uncertain growing seasons. Dreams remained another important source of hidden messages. Unlike modern psychology, medieval Europeans generally interpreted dreams as communications rather than reflections of the subconscious mind. A vivid dream could inspire genuine concern. Monastic writers sometimes distinguished between ordinary dreams and those believed worthy of careful attention. Not every dream deserved interpretation. Many simply reflected daily experiences. Others, however, seemed unusually clear or emotionally powerful. Dream books circulated in parts of medieval Europe, offering symbolic meanings for common images. Seeing clear water, climbing mountains, finding precious objects, losing clothing, meeting strangers. Each symbol supposedly revealed something about the future or the dreamer's spiritual condition. Historians now recognize influences from ancient Greek, Roman, Jewish, Islamic, and Christian traditions blending together within these interpretations. Ideas rarely remained confined to one civilization. They traveled alongside merchants, scholars, and pilgrims. Even the human body itself generated omens. A ringing ear, an itching palm, an unexpected sneeze, sudden twitching of an eyelid. Across medieval Europe, such ordinary experiences attracted symbolic explanations. Some believed a ringing ear meant someone spoke about you elsewhere. An itching hand might predict receiving or spending money depending upon local tradition. Sneezing occasionally inspired immediate blessings, partly because illness often began with seemingly minor symptoms. Interestingly, the custom of responding kindly to a sneeze survives in many cultures today, although its historical origins remain surprisingly complex. Many of these beliefs provided emotional comfort rather than genuine prediction. They transformed random bodily sensations into meaningful experiences. Humans generally prefer meaningful uncertainty to meaningless randomness. That preference has remained remarkably consistent throughout history. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of medieval omens was not that people believed them. It was how carefully they observed the world around them. They noticed seasonal changes modern urban life often hides. They recognized migrating birds. They remembered flowering patterns. They understood the habits of local wildlife. Their conclusions sometimes wandered beyond the available evidence, but their attention to nature was extraordinarily sharp. For people whose survival depended directly upon fields, forests, rivers, and changing weather, careful observation was simply part of everyday life. Yet while ordinary villagers searched for signs in birds, dreams, and changing skies, another group of people occupied a unique position within medieval society. They were believed by many to possess special knowledge of herbs, healing, prayers, and ancient traditions passed quietly from one generation to the next. Some earned deep respect from their neighbors. Others eventually attracted fear and suspicion. Their stories reveal how easily admiration could transform into accusation, especially when superstition and uncertainty began shaping the way communities judged one another. Throughout much of the Middle Ages, knowledge rarely existed inside neat categories. The same individual who understood how to set a broken bone might also know which herbs eased a persistent cough. A woman respected for helping deliver healthy babies might also be asked to identify useful medicinal plants growing along the edge of nearby woods. A monk who spent years copying religious manuscripts could simultaneously cultivate an impressive garden filled with healing herbs. To modern observers, these roles appear separate. Medieval society often saw them as naturally connected. This is one reason why the popular image of the Middle Ages as a time completely dominated by fear of magic oversimplifies history. In reality, many communities depended upon people whose knowledge blended careful observation with inherited tradition. Village healers existed in many forms. Some had learned from parents or grandparents. Others gained innate experience through years of practical work. Monasteries preserved important medical texts translated from ancient Greek and Roman authors, while scholars also benefited enormously from the scientific and medical writings produced throughout the Islamic world. Works by physicians such as Avicenna circulated widely in medieval universities, expanding European medical understanding far beyond what many modern stereotypes suggest. Yet even the best-trained physician eventually encountered mysteries. A treatment that succeeded one week failed the next. Two patients with similar symptoms experienced entirely different outcomes. The limits of knowledge remained visible every day. Whenever explanations reached their limits, superstition often stepped forward to fill the remaining space. Herbal gardens became fascinating places where practical medicine and folklore quietly met. Consider St. John's wort. Today, researchers recognize that this plant contains biologically active compounds and continues to be studied for certain medical uses, although modern treatment follows carefully controlled evidence rather than medieval tradition. Centuries ago, however, the bright yellow flowers inspired additional symbolism. Because the plant bloomed around the feast of St. John the Baptist, many believed it possessed special protective qualities. Bundles were sometimes hung inside homes. Others carried small pieces while traveling. The plant became associated not only with healing, but with spiritual protection. Its usefulness therefore expanded beyond medicine. Another familiar herb, mugwort, acquired an equally rich reputation. Travelers occasionally tucked it into clothing before long journeys. Some believed it reduced fatigue. Others considered it protective against unseen dangers encountered on lonely roads. Whether the herb genuinely offered any practical benefit mattered less than the confidence it inspired. Confidence itself can influence how people experience difficult journeys. A nervous traveler carrying a familiar charm often feels calmer than one setting out empty-handed. That truth has changed very little over the centuries. Yarrow also enjoyed considerable respect. Experienced healers noticed that crushed yarrow sometimes appeared helpful when applied to minor wounds. Modern science has identified compounds within the plant that may possess mild anti-inflammatory properties, although medieval users naturally lacked that biochemical understanding. Instead, successful treatments became stories. Stories became traditions. Traditions became accepted wisdom. Sometimes practical observation stood quietly beneath the legend. Sometimes coincidence did. Distinguishing between them proved almost impossible without modern experimentation. Protective charms reflected a similar pattern. Archaeologists have discovered countless small objects once carried or worn throughout medieval Europe. Tiny crosses carved from wood. Lead badges purchased by pilgrims visiting famous shrines. Small pouches containing prayers written on folded parchment. Animal teeth. Smooth stones collected from particular rivers. Fragments of cloth believed connected with holy places. To a medieval owner, these were not decorations. They represented reassurance. A merchant crossing unfamiliar mountains might carry a pilgrim badge received years earlier after visiting Canterbury. A soldier marching toward battle perhaps kept a small relic inside his clothing. A mother could sew a tiny cross into her infant's blanket. Each object represented hope carried in physical form. The church itself generally encouraged devotion centered upon officially recognized relics and prayers while discouraging magical practices that claimed supernatural power independent of God. In everyday village life, however, those distinctions were not always clear. People often combined official religious practices with customs inherited from earlier generations. This blending occurred gradually across centuries rather than through deliberate rebellion. The average farmer rarely thought in terms of theology. He simply followed customs that respected both his faith and his ancestors. Not every protective object came from religion. Some reflected much older traditions whose original meanings had already faded. Horse skulls discovered beneath the floors of old buildings have puzzled archaeologists for decades. In several medieval structures, particularly in parts of Britain and Northern Europe, carefully placed animal remains appear to have served symbolic rather than practical purposes. Scholars continue debating their exact purpose. Perhaps they improved acoustics in certain buildings. Perhaps they reflected protective beliefs. Perhaps different communities used similar practices for entirely different reasons. History often preserves evidence while leaving the explanations behind. One particularly intriguing discovery in Vaux. Elvas concealed shoes. Across Europe, historians have found worn shoes hidden inside walls, chimneys, and roof spaces of old houses. Many date from the late medieval or early modern period. Why hide an old shoe inside a wall? No single explanation satisfies every example. Some researchers believe worn footwear symbolically trapped harmful influences because shoes carried the imprint of the owner's life. Others suggest they functioned as protective offerings placed during construction. The people who hid them rarely left written explanations. Their quiet actions survive. Their reasoning often remains hidden. Children received especially careful protection. Infant mortality remained heartbreakingly high throughout much of the medieval world. Families therefore surrounded newborns with every safeguard they knew. Baptism occurred as soon as practical, reflecting both sincere religious belief and concern for the child's well-being. Cradles sometimes displayed small crosses. Parents prayed nightly. Grandparents shared traditional advice accumulated through generations. Certain lullabies themselves may have originated as protective prayers gradually transformed into songs. Music soothed children. Words reassured parents. Even ordinary clothing could acquire symbolic importance. Some garments were carefully preserved because a respected relative had worn them. Others accompanied family members during significant life events. A wedding cloak, a christening cloth, a pilgrim's hat. Objects gathered emotional meaning through experience. Losing them felt far more significant than merely replacing fabric. Traveling storytellers helped spread many superstitions from one region to another. Markets drew people from neighboring villages every week. Seasonal fairs attracted merchants from remarkable distances. Alongside cloth, grain, pottery, livestock, and spices came stories. A merchant returning from Italy described an unusual custom practiced there. A pilgrim arriving from France shared a tale heard at a monastery. A wandering musician entertained crowds with legends collected over hundreds of miles. Most listeners could not verify these accounts. They did not need to. A memorable story traveled easily. Each retelling introduced small changes. One village added local landmarks. Another replaced unfamiliar saints with regional favorites. Within a few generations, foreign traditions often appeared completely native. This gradual exchange explains why remarkably similar superstitions emerged across distant regions despite cultural differences. Human beings consistently respond to uncertainty in comparable ways. Fear encourages stories. Stories encourage customs. Customs become traditions. Traditions shape future generations. Education slowly began changing portions of this picture. By the 12th and 13th centuries, universities flourished in cities such as Bologna, Paris, Oxford, and elsewhere. Students debated philosophy, medicine, law, and theology using increasingly systematic methods. Questions became important. Observation became increasingly valued. Ancient authorities remained respected, yet scholars also compared ideas, argued over evidence, and sought logical consistency. This intellectual movement did not eliminate superstition overnight. Far from it. University professors themselves sometimes accepted beliefs modern science rejects. Nevertheless, an important shift had begun. Some explanations increasingly depended upon careful reasoning rather than inherited tradition alone. The transformation unfolded gradually across centuries. Most villagers noticed little immediate difference. Life still depended upon weather, harvests, family, health, faith, hope. The rhythms of ordinary existence changed slowly. Yet beneath those familiar routines, medieval Europe was beginning a quiet intellectual journey that would eventually reshape how people understood both the natural world and the countless superstitions that had accompanied everyday life for generations. Before that transformation reached most villages, however, kings, queens, nobles, and even powerful rulers remained just as vulnerable to unusual beliefs as the poorest peasant. And within the glittering halls of castles, superstition often influenced political decisions whose consequences reached far beyond a single household. The towering stone castles that dominate paintings of the Middle Ages often give the impression of complete confidence and unshakable authority. Thick walls surrounded by moats, armored guards standing at heavy gates, brightly colored banners fluttering above great towers, and richly decorated halls suggest a world where power alone determined the course of history. Yet behind those impressive walls lived men and women who faced the same uncertainties as every farmer, craftsman, or merchant. Crowns could not prevent illness. Wealth could not guarantee healthy children. Military victories did not eliminate fear of drought, plague, or sudden death. Royal families therefore proved just as susceptible to superstition as ordinary villagers. Sometimes even more so. A medieval ruler rarely made decisions alone. Kings and queens lived surrounded by advisors, bishops, physicians, military commanders, diplomats, astrologers, and members of powerful noble families. Each brought different opinions, different experiences, and occasionally very different interpretations of unusual events. If an eclipse darkened the sky shortly before an important military campaign, someone almost certainly noticed. If a comet appeared above the horizon during a period of political tension, chroniclers often recorded it with great interest. When an heir to the throne became seriously ill after an unexpected storm, whispers quickly spread through the palace. Not everyone interpreted these events in the same way. Some dismissed them. Others considered them deeply significant. Medieval chronicles provide fascinating examples of this tendency. It is important, however, to approach these records carefully. Many chroniclers wrote their histories years or even decades after the events they described. Knowing how a story eventually ended often influenced the way they described what came before. Suppose a beloved king died unexpectedly. A historian writing 20 years later might remember that a bright comet had appeared several months before the king's death. Rather than treating the comet as an unrelated astronomical event, the chronicler could describe it as though heaven itself had announced the coming tragedy. The connection existed because the ending was already known. This is an example of what modern historians sometimes call retrospective interpretation. The event appears meaningful because people already know the outcome. One of the most famous examples involves the appearance of Halley's Comet in 1066. That year transformed English history. King Edward the Confessor died without leaving a direct heir. Harold Godwinson became king. Soon afterward, William, Duke of Normandy, crossed the English Channel and defeated Harold at the Battle of Hastings. The resulting Norman conquest permanently reshaped England. The remarkable Bayeux Tapestry, created not long after these events, includes a striking image of the comet. People gaze upward with expressions of surprise and concern. To many contemporaries, the brilliant object crossing the sky seemed anything but ordinary. Today, astronomers know Halley's Comet follows a predictable orbit, returning approximately every 75 or 76 years. Its appearance had absolutely nothing to do with English politics. Yet medieval observers naturally sought meaning within such an extraordinary spectacle. It seemed impossible that so unusual a sight could be merely coincidence. Dreams sometimes influenced rulers as well. Throughout history, kings and emperors have occasionally reported vivid dreams before major events. The medieval period was no exception. Chronicles describe rulers dreaming of battles, saints, heavenly visions, or symbolic animals. Some dreams inspired confidence. Others produced caution. Whether the dreams themselves truly occurred exactly as later writers described remains difficult to determine. Chroniclers often shaped stories to emphasize moral lessons. Even so, the existence of these accounts demonstrates how seriously dreams could be taken. A powerful ruler possessed armies and wealth. Yet while sleeping, he remained as vulnerable to uncertainty as anyone else. Astrologers occupied an especially interesting position within medieval courts. Contrary to popular stereotypes, astrology and astronomy were not sharply separated during much of the Middle Ages. Careful observation of the heavens represented genuine scholarship. Universities taught astronomy because calculating calendars, determining the date of Easter, and understanding planetary movements all required mathematical skill. Some scholars extended these observations into astrology, believing celestial bodies influenced earthly events. Many educated people accepted at least some degree of astrological influence. Royal courts occasionally employed astrologers alongside physicians and other learned advisors. Not every ruler followed their advice. Some ignored it completely. Others listened carefully while making final decisions based upon political realities. The historical evidence reveals considerable variety rather than a single pattern. Medieval rulers also treasured certain objects believed to bring protection or success. Relics associated with respected saints ranked among the most valued possessions in Europe. Entire cathedrals became famous because they housed important relics attracting thousands of pilgrims every year. Kings sometimes carried relics into battle. Royal chapels preserved them with extraordinary care. Their importance reflected sincere religious devotion rather than simple superstition. Nevertheless, the emotional reassurance these objects provided resembled the comfort ordinary villagers found in smaller protective charms. Across every social class, people appreciated symbols of hope. Coronation ceremonies themselves contained rich symbolism. A king was not merely crowned. He was anointed with holy oil during a religious ceremony, emphasizing divine responsibility. The ritual reminded everyone present that kingship carried moral obligations as well as political authority. Because the ceremony possessed such profound significance, unusual events occurring during or shortly after a coronation occasionally attracted widespread attention. If severe weather interrupted celebrations, observers sometimes wondered whether it carried symbolic meaning. If everything proceeded peacefully, that too could be interpreted as a favorable sign. Either way, nature rarely escaped notice. Animals inside royal residences inspired their own stories. White stags, ravens, falcons, horses. Each species possessed symbolic associations developed across centuries. Falcons represented nobility, discipline, and skill. The training required for falconry impressed medieval society, making these birds highly respected companions among aristocratic families. A falcon behaving unexpectedly before an important hunt might become the subject of quiet discussion. Again, coincidence often strengthened belief. If nothing unusual followed, the incident faded. If misfortune occurred later, memory connected the two events. Medieval queens frequently maintained gardens filled with medicinal herbs as well as decorative flowers. These gardens served practical purposes. Household remedies depended upon fresh plants. Kitchen staff required herbs for cooking. Physicians valued easy access to medicinal ingredients. Yet gardens also inspired symbolic interpretations. The flourishing of articular flowers sometimes encouraged optimistic predictions. Plants unexpectedly withering without obvious cause occasionally raised concern. Weather, soil quality, insects, and disease usually provided the true explanations. Human imagination often preferred more dramatic possibilities. Births within royal families generated enormous public interest. An heir represented political stability. Without a clear successor, kingdoms sometimes descended into conflict. Consequently, pregnancies involving queens became matters of national importance. Every detail attracted attention. The date, the weather, unusual dreams reported by attendants, unexpected celestial events. Although modern historians approach such stories cautiously, contemporary chronicles frequently preserved them because audiences found them meaningful. The desire to discover signs surrounding future rulers appears repeatedly throughout history. One remarkable example comes from medieval France, where the royal touch gradually developed into an important tradition. Beginning during the High Middle Ages and continuing for centuries afterward, French and English monarchs were believed by many to possess the ability to heal a condition known as scrofula simply by touching those afflicted. This practice reflected a combination of religious belief, royal ceremony, and public expectation. Large crowds gathered hoping for healing. Some undoubtedly experienced improvement. Others did not. Modern medicine identifies scrofula as a form of tuberculosis affecting lymph nodes, a disease that cannot be cured through ceremonial touch alone. Nevertheless, the tradition endured for generations because faith, hope, and the prestige of monarchy reinforced one another. Political decisions occasionally intersected with superstition in subtle ways. Suppose two possible days existed for launching a military expedition. If respected advisors considered one date especially favorable according to religious calendars or astrological calculations, a cautious ruler might choose it. Such choices rarely depended upon superstition alone. Weather, supplies, road conditions, enemy movements, all mattered far more. Yet symbolic considerations sometimes influenced the final decision. Not because medieval rulers lacked intelligence, rather because uncertainty encouraged every possible advantage. A favorable sign cost nothing. Ignoring one seemed unnecessarily risky. Perhaps the most revealing aspect of royal superstition lies in how similar it was to ordinary village life. A peasant hung blessed branches above a stable. A king carried a revered relic into battle. A farmer watched the behavior of birds before planting. A queen listened carefully to reports of unusual dreams before the birth of an heir. The objects differed. The scale differed. The underlying hope remained remarkably alike. Across every level of medieval society, people longed for reassurance that the future might be understood, even if only through the faintest whisper carried by the natural world. And while castles and palaces preserved these beliefs among the powerful, the bustling streets of medieval towns developed their own collection of curious customs. Busy markets, crowded guild halls, noisy taverns, and lively festivals became places where merchants, craftsmen, pilgrims, and travelers exchanged not only goods, but also an astonishing variety of superstitions, beliefs that spread from city to city almost as quickly as the trade routes themselves. As the Middle Ages progressed, Europe slowly became more connected through trade than it had been for centuries after the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. Rivers carried barges loaded with grain, timber, wine, and cloth. Merchant caravans crossed mountain passes linking kingdoms separated by hundreds of miles. Coastal ships sailed between ports on the Baltic Sea, the North Sea, the Mediterranean, and beyond. Every market day brought together strangers who spoke different languages yet understood the universal language of buying, selling, bargaining, and storytelling. Where people gathered, ideas traveled. A medieval marketplace offered much more than vegetables, livestock, iron tools, pottery, spices, or woven cloth. It functioned as the information network of its age. News of distant wars spread from merchant to merchant. Pilgrims described remarkable churches they had visited. Sailors told stories of violent storms encountered at sea. Traveling musicians entertained crowds with legends collected over countless miles of wandering. Among all those conversations, superstitions traveled remarkably well. Unlike official laws, beliefs required no written documents. Unlike expensive goods, they weighed nothing. Unlike livestock, they needed no food. A memorable story could cross an entire continent simply because people enjoyed repeating it. Imagine arriving at a bustling market in northern France during the 13th century. Wooden stalls fill the town square. Blacksmiths hammer glowing iron. The smell of fresh bread drifts from nearby ovens. Farmers negotiate over sheep and cattle. Children chase one another between wagons while church bells echo across the rooftops. You overhear a merchant explaining that sailors in the south refuse to leave harbor after seeing an unusual halo around the moon. A cloth seller from another region insists that carrying a sprig of rosemary prevented illness during his last journey. Nearby, a pilgrim quietly describes an ancient spring where several travelers reportedly recovered from serious sickness. Whether these stories were true mattered less than whether they were memorable. The most vivid stories survived. The ordinary ones disappeared. This pattern helped shape medieval folklore throughout Europe. Merchants themselves occupied an unusual position in society. Unlike peasants who often remained close to home throughout their lives, merchants regularly encountered unfamiliar customs. Crossing political borders meant entering regions with different laws, different coins, different saints, and different local traditions. A belief considered obvious in one town might seem completely unfamiliar 50 miles away. Some merchants ignored these differences. Others adopted useful customs simply because they appeared harmless. Suppose a respected trader insisted that beginning a journey on a particular feast day had always brought good fortune. His companions might decide there was little harm in following the same practice. If the journey succeeded, the belief gained another supporter. If problems occurred anyway, people often blamed other causes. Successful coincidences remained easier to remember than unsuccessful ones. Guilds also contributed to the spread of symbolic traditions. Throughout medieval towns, craftsmen organized themselves into professional associations known as guilds. Blacksmiths, carpenters, masons, weavers, Goldsmiths. Each guild regulated training, maintained standards of workmanship, and often participated in religious festivals honoring patron saints. Within these organizations, practical knowledge passed from master to apprentice. Occasionally, symbolic customs accompanied technical instruction. A young apprentice beginning work might receive advice extending beyond the craft itself. Respect your tools. Begin important work carefully. Offer thanks after completing difficult projects. Some advice reflected workplace discipline. Other customs blended tradition with quiet superstition. The distinction often mattered very little. Stonemasons provide an interesting example. Building a cathedral required decades, sometimes even centuries. Generations of craftsmen worked on the same structure. Many never lived to see the finished building. When undertaking projects lasting far longer than a human lifetime, symbolic ceremonies naturally developed. The laying of a foundation stone became an important occasion. Special prayers accompanied major milestones. Certain dates acquired emotional significance. These ceremonies reflected genuine religious devotion, community pride, and a natural human desire to mark meaningful achievements. Market days themselves generated curious customs. Early arrival often meant better opportunities for selling goods. Consequently, many traders developed personal routines before opening their stalls. Some arranged merchandise in carefully repeated patterns. Others quietly touched religious medals carried beneath their clothing. A few whispered short prayers requesting an honest day's trade. Modern athletes sometimes follow remarkably similar routines before important competitions. Psychologists recognize that familiar rituals reduce anxiety and increase confidence. The medieval merchant likely experienced something similar, even if he explained it differently. Coins inspired their own collection of beliefs. Money represented security. It also moved constantly from one hand to another. Finding an unexpected coin on the road naturally pleased almost anyone. Losing one felt equally disappointing. Certain customs therefore emerged regarding the first payment received each morning. In some regions, traders hoped the opening sale would proceed smoothly because it supposedly influenced the remainder of the day. This idea survived well beyond the Middle Ages and can still be found in various forms among market vendors around the world. Whether any real connection existed mattered less than the optimism created by a successful beginning. Weights and measures occasionally attracted symbolic importance as well. Honest merchants depended upon trust. A trader known for cheating customers quickly damaged his own reputation. Some guilds therefore encouraged public demonstrations showing that official weights remained accurate. Although this represented practical regulation rather than superstition, honest trade gradually acquired moral symbolism. Fair dealing pleased both customers and God. Dishonesty invited eventual misfortune. Many medieval sermons reinforced this connection between ethical behavior and prosperity. Taverns provided another fertile environment for storytelling. After long days of travel, merchants, pilgrims, laborers, and local residents gathered around shared tables. Food appeared. Ale flowed. Conversations lengthened. News mixed freely with exaggeration. One traveler claimed to have seen mysterious lights dancing above marshland. Another insisted wolves had surrounded his caravan before suddenly disappearing. Someone else described a remote monastery possessing a miraculous relic. With every retelling, details shifted slightly. A single unusual event gradually became an unforgettable legend. Modern folklore researchers observe exactly this process in oral traditions around the world. Stories evolve because memory is creative rather than perfectly accurate. People unconsciously emphasize dramatic moments while simplifying ordinary details. After enough repetitions, listeners often remember the improved version rather than the original experience. Public festivals also encouraged symbolic behavior. The medieval calendar contained far more communal celebrations than many people realize. Religious feast days interrupted ordinary routines throughout the year. Harvest festivals thanked God for successful crops. Town fairs combined commerce with entertainment. Seasonal processions filled streets with music, banners, candles, and carefully organized ceremonies. During these occasions, older local customs sometimes blended with official religious observances. A village might decorate homes using greenery collected from nearby woods. Children carried flowers. Bonfires illuminated public squares. Church processions moved through streets blessing fields or asking protection for the coming season. Different regions developed distinct traditions, yet nearly all reflected humanity's desire to mark the changing rhythm of the year. Medieval people lived much closer to seasonal change than modern urban societies. The arrival of spring transformed survival itself. Fresh vegetables returned. Animals produced new offspring. Roads became easier to travel. Winter stores no longer determined every meal. No wonder spring inspired hopeful customs. Autumn carried different emotions. Harvests determined whether families would eat comfortably through winter. Every wagon loaded with grain represented security. Unexpected storms during harvest season therefore generated understandable anxiety. Many communities organized prayers asking favorable weather during these crucial weeks. Alongside those prayers, inherited traditions quietly persisted. Some farmers preferred beginning harvest on particular days. Others paid close attention to birds or cloud formations before sending workers into the fields. Not every belief lacked practical value. Generations of experience had taught medieval farmers to recognize genuine environmental signs. Unfortunately, reliable observations often became intertwined with assumptions that extended far beyond available evidence. The result was a fascinating mixture of wisdom and superstition. One strengthened survival. The other strengthened hope. Sometimes they were impossible to separate. Even laughter occasionally attracted unusual beliefs. Certain communities discouraged excessive celebration immediately after remarkable good fortune. Boasting too loudly about unexpected success seemed unwise. The reasoning varied. Some feared envy from neighbors. Others worried that pride invited divine correction. Still others believed fortune itself behaved unpredictably and should never be taken for granted. Although expressed through superstition, these ideas encouraged humility and moderation, qualities many medieval religious teachers also praised. As medieval towns continued to grow larger and busier, educated scholars, experienced physicians, parish priests, village elders, merchants, and ordinary families all encountered one another more frequently than ever before. Their conversations slowly revealed an intriguing reality. Not every old belief survived careful questioning. Some traditions quietly faded, others adapted to changing times. Yet many endured with remarkable determination, reminding us that even as knowledge expanded across Europe, the human desire to find meaning in uncertainty remained every bit as powerful as it had been generations before. By the later Middle Ages, Europe had become a place where two seemingly opposite developments unfolded at the same time. On one hand, universities expanded, libraries grew, trade connected distant regions, and scholars translated ancient works that had been forgotten in parts of Western Europe for centuries. On the other hand, countless traditional beliefs continued to flourish among every level of society. To modern eyes, these developments may appear contradictory. For medieval people, they were not. A university professor could spend the morning studying Aristotle, teach logic to students during the afternoon, attend church in the evening, and still accept certain astrological ideas that modern science rejects. Likewise, a village blacksmith could produce beautifully engineered iron tools through years of practical experience, while quietly avoiding beginning an important commission on what he considered an unlucky day. Human beliefs are rarely perfectly consistent. They never have been. One of the greatest misconceptions about the Middle Ages is the idea that educated people knew the truth while everyone else lived entirely according to superstition. History paints a much richer picture. Many educated scholars actively challenged popular misunderstandings. Others accepted them. Some attempted to separate reliable observation from inherited folklore. Others argued that both possessed value when properly understood. The medieval world contained debate rather than complete agreement. This becomes especially clear when examining medieval medicine. By the 13th and 14th centuries, universities in cities such as Bologna, Montpellier, Paris, Oxford, and Padua trained physicians using remarkably sophisticated collections of knowledge inherited from Greek, Roman, Byzantine, and Islamic scholarship. Students learned anatomy as it was understood during their age. They studied diet, surgery, pharmacy, and the writings of respected authorities such as Hippocrates, Galen, and Avicenna. These physicians did not simply memorize old books. Many compared observations with established teachings. Some questioned older assumptions. Others introduced new interpretations. Progress moved slowly, but it moved. Yet outside university walls, village life continued according to rhythms that had changed very little for generations. A farmer deciding when to sow barley still watched the weather more carefully than academic debates. A shepherd remained concerned about wolves rather than philosophical arguments. A mother comforting a sick child naturally relied first upon remedies she trusted because they had been used successfully within her own family. Knowledge spreads gradually. Even today, new discoveries often require years before becoming ordinary practice. During the Middle Ages, with limited literacy and slow communication, that process unfolded over decades or centuries. Priests occupied another fascinating position. Many parish priests served as the most educated individuals within their communities. They read Latin, maintained parish records, led worship, sometimes advised local leaders. Often they encouraged people to place their trust primarily in prayer, charity, and accepted church teaching rather than magical practices. At the same time, these priests understood the communities they served. Completely abandoning long-established customs proved nearly impossible. Consequently, compromise often occurred naturally. A custom originally associated with older traditions might gradually become connected with a Christian feast day. A local spring once famous for ancient legends might now honor a saint. A seasonal celebration continued, although its meaning slowly changed. Historians call this process religious and cultural adaptation. Rather than erasing older customs overnight, societies gradually reshaped them. This explains why medieval Europe preserved such a remarkable variety of local traditions. The church itself was never a single voice speaking identically in every village across the continent. Regional differences mattered enormously. One bishop might strongly discourage certain practices. Another focused attention elsewhere. Some monasteries collected local folklore, while others ignored it entirely. The Middle Ages stretched across nearly 1,000 years and encompassed hundreds of political territories. Generalizations always require caution. Even famous medieval scholars occasionally warned against excessive superstition. Thomas Aquinas' writing during the 13th century carefully distinguished between acceptable religious belief and practices he considered superstitious or spiritually dangerous. Other theologians made similar distinctions. Their concern was not with ordinary caution or family traditions, but with the idea that objects or rituals possessed independent supernatural power apart from God. These debates remind us that skepticism toward superstition existed within medieval society itself. It was not invented later. Legal records also reveal changing attitudes. Court documents from different kingdoms occasionally mention disputes involving alleged magical practices, fortune-telling, or unusual charms. Interestingly, many cases had little to do with dramatic accusations. Instead, they concerned ordinary disagreements between neighbors. Did someone sell a charm while falsely promising miraculous results? Did a healer charge money for remedies considered deceptive? Did local customs conflict with church teaching? Reality usually proved less sensational than modern legends suggest. Most medieval people spent their lives worrying about harvests, taxes, family responsibilities, and surviving winter, not hunting mysterious enemies. Printing would eventually transform this entire landscape. Although Johannes Gutenberg's movable type printing press belongs to the 15th century, near the end of the medieval period, its arrival marked the beginning of an extraordinary change. Books that once required months of careful copying by hand could now be produced much more quickly. Ideas traveled farther. Arguments spread faster. Knowledge became increasingly available beyond monasteries and universities. Superstitions did not disappear because of printing. Far from it. Printed books sometimes spread them even more effectively. Collections of folk remedies, almanacs, calendars, and popular advice circulated widely. At the same time, scientific observations also reached larger audiences. Both reliable knowledge and mistaken ideas benefited from improved communication. This pattern continues even in the modern world. Information travels rapidly. So does misinformation. The challenge has always been learning how to distinguish between them. Navigation offers another revealing example. Early medieval sailors relied heavily upon coastlines, familiar landmarks, seasonal winds, and accumulated experience. Over time, improved maps, better compasses, and increasingly systematic observation gradually reduced uncertainty. Nevertheless, experienced captains often preserved traditional customs before dangerous voyages. Launching a ship represented enormous financial risk. If a familiar ritual helped calm anxious crews, few objected. P.S. Ecologists today recognize that rituals reduce stress even when they possess no direct physical effect upon events themselves. The human mind has changed far less than technology. Architecture likewise reflected gradual change. Builders continued carving protective symbols into certain structures long after scholars debated their significance. A mason who had learned a particular custom from his master often repeated it without questioning its origin. Tradition itself carried authority. People trusted methods that seemed to have served previous generations well. Sometimes that trust produced remarkable craftsmanship. Sometimes it preserved harmless superstitions. Often it preserved both simultaneously. Children remained the bridge between generations. Every evening, stories passed quietly from older voices to younger ears. Some explained why birds migrated. Others warned against wandering into dangerous forests. A few described saints performing miracles. Still others recalled strange happenings witnessed decades earlier. No written textbook controlled these conversations. Memory shaped them. Imagination refined them. Experience selected which stories survived. A frightening tale that kept children away from deep rivers may have saved lives regardless of whether its supernatural details were true. Folklore frequently preserved practical wisdom beneath imaginative storytelling. As historians continue studying medieval society, archaeology has become an increasingly valuable companion to written records. Excavations uncover objects never mentioned in official chronicles. Hidden shoes inside walls. Protective symbols scratched onto fireplaces. Pilgrim badges buried beneath collapsed buildings. Children's toys. Cooking utensils. Broken tools. Simple household items. Together, these discoveries reveal something profoundly important. The Middle Ages were not lived by kings alone. Most people whose beliefs shaped medieval superstition never appeared in grand historical narratives. They left no famous speeches, won no celebrated battles, signed no royal charters. Instead, they quietly planted fields, raised families, built houses, prayed in parish churches, shared stories around evening fires. Their voices survive only in fragments scattered through archaeology, court records, sermons, letters, and folklore. When those fragments are carefully assembled, a far more human picture emerges. Medieval people were neither foolish nor uniquely gullible. They lived in a world where uncertainty surrounded nearly every aspect of existence. Without modern science, they relied upon observation, memory, inherited wisdom, faith, and community experience. Sometimes those methods led surprisingly close to accurate conclusions. Sometimes they wandered into superstition. Often the two became so closely intertwined that separating them centuries later remains extraordinarily difficult. And perhaps that is the most fascinating lesson of all. The strange superstitions of medieval Europe were not simply collections of bizarre beliefs. They were deeply human attempts, to bring order to an unpredictable world. They reflected hope in times of fear, comfort in moments of uncertainty, meaning when answers remained hidden. As our journey continues, we will discover that many of these medieval beliefs never truly disappeared. Instead, they quietly evolved, passing from generation to generation until echoes of them can still be found in modern customs, familiar sayings, everyday habits, and traditions that millions of people continue to practice today without ever realizing their remarkable medieval origins. The strange superstitions of medieval Europe did not vanish when the Middle Ages ended. Instead, many of them changed shape, becoming quieter, more familiar, and sometimes almost invisible within everyday life. A belief that once involved spirits, omens, saints, or mysterious forces could slowly transform into a simple habit passed from parents to children. Centuries later, people might continue following the custom while forgetting the medieval fears and hopes that created it. This is one of the most fascinating parts of studying history. The past does not disappear completely. It leaves behind echoes. A person today might knock on wood after mentioning good fortune, avoid certain unlucky numbers, carry a meaningful object during an important event, or follow a small personal ritual before something stressful happens. These actions may appear completely ordinary, yet many have roots reaching back through centuries of human attempts to understand uncertainty. Medieval people were not unusual because they searched for signs. They were human because they searched for signs. Every generation has faced moments where knowledge was incomplete. A farmer waiting for rain. A sailor preparing to cross dangerous waters. A parent hoping a child survives illness. A ruler fearing political disaster. A traveler entering unknown territory. All of them face the same emotional question. What can I do when the future cannot be controlled? Superstitions provided possible answers. They created a feeling of preparation in a world where preparation often had limits. A protective charm could not guarantee safety. A prayer could not prevent every tragedy. A ritual could not command the weather. Yet these actions gave people something incredibly valuable, a sense that they were not completely powerless. That feeling shaped medieval life from the smallest village cottage to the greatest royal palace. Looking back, it is easy to judge old beliefs through the knowledge available today. We understand diseases that medieval people could not see. We explain eclipses through astronomy. We understand animal behavior through biology. We predict weather using advanced technology. We know that random events do not always contain hidden messages. But historical understanding requires more than asking whether a belief was scientifically correct. It requires asking why people found that belief convincing. A medieval farmer who saw an eclipse did not have access to modern astronomy. A medieval mother caring for a sick child did not understand bacteria or viruses. A medieval traveler hearing strange sounds in a dark forest did not know every animal that moved through the trees. Their explanations developed from the world they experienced. Their beliefs were shaped by fear, observation, tradition, religion, and the stories of those who came before them. In many ways, medieval superstition was a record of human imagination trying to negotiate with uncertainty. The natural world was not separate from daily existence. It was everywhere. The changing seasons determined survival. Animals influenced agriculture. Weather decided whether families ate well or struggled. The sky provided signs of time and direction. The landscape carried memories of ancient events. Because nature controlled so much of life, medieval people naturally searched for relationships between events. Sometimes those connections were accurate. Farmers understood patterns in planting seasons. Sailors recognized dangerous weather changes. Herbalists identified plants with genuine healing properties. Generations of experience created valuable knowledge. But alongside that knowledge grew stories explaining things that remained mysterious. A bird's unusual flight, a strange dream, a sudden illness, a rare celestial event, a mysterious sound at night. These moments became opportunities for meaning. Perhaps that is why superstition remained so powerful. It transformed uncertainty into a story. A story was easier to remember than randomness. A story could be shared. A story could teach. A story could comfort. Even when the explanation was incorrect, the emotional purpose behind it was real. The medieval world was also far more diverse than many people imagine. There was no single medieval belief system shared equally by every person. A noble living in a stone castle, a fisherman near a coastal village, a monk inside a monastery, and a farmer working distant fields all experienced life differently. Their customs reflected their environments. A sailor feared different dangers from a mountain shepherd. A merchant traveling between kingdoms encountered different traditions from a person who rarely left their birthplace. Superstitions changed from region to region because human experiences changed from place to place. Some beliefs disappeared quickly. Others survived for centuries. The beliefs that lasted were often connected to powerful emotions. Protection, health, family, love, death, success, fear of the unknown. These concerns remain universal. That is why medieval traditions still feel strangely familiar today. The world has transformed dramatically. Cities now cover landscapes that were once forests. Machines have replaced many forms of physical labor. Communication that once required months can now happen instantly. Yet the human desire for reassurance has remained almost unchanged. People still search for patterns. They still create traditions. They still find comfort in familiar actions. The difference is not that modern people have stopped believing. The difference is that modern explanations have changed. History teaches us humility because every generation believes it understands the world better than those before it. Often it does. But future generations may look back at some of our own assumptions with the same curiosity we feel toward medieval beliefs. They may wonder why we trusted certain ideas, why we followed certain habits, why particular fears shaped our decisions. The people of the Middle Ages were not simply characters from old stories living in a world of darkness and ignorance. They were farmers watching the skies, parents protecting their child, travelers hoping to return home safely, craftsmen creating beautiful works, scholars searching for knowledge, believers looking for comfort. They were people trying to understand a complicated world with the tools available to them. Their superstitions reveal their fears, but they also reveal their creativity, their resilience, and their endless desire to find meaning. Every charm carried in a pocket, every prayer whispered before a journey, every symbol carved into a doorway, every story told beside a winter fire. Each one represented a small human attempt to face uncertainty with courage. And perhaps that is why these strange medieval beliefs continue to fascinate us. They remind us that history is not only about battles, kings, inventions, and political changes. History is also about ordinary moments. The quiet decisions people made when nobody was watching. The small traditions repeated year after year. The hopes hidden inside simple actions. The fears carried silently from one generation to another. When we look closely at medieval superstition, we are not simply looking at unusual beliefs from a distant age. We are looking at ourselves. We are seeing the same human questions that have followed civilization for thousands of years. What does the future hold? How can we protect those we love? How can we find meaning in events we cannot explain? The answers have changed throughout history, but the questions remain. And that is what makes the strange superstitions of medieval people not only a story about the past, but also a reflection of the timeless human journey to understand a world filled with mystery. If you want to continue the journey, the next video is waiting.